All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking real quick about SASS, which is a CSS preprocessor. Now, any of you who have done anything with like your traditional programming languages, say C, C++, Java, would probably have heard the term preprocessor thrown around before. Long story short, what it is it's something that it's a tiny little program that reads through your code for things called macros, or things that are defined by you ahead of time to be expanded into other things. So for example, if I were to define something, say define a macro, my macro name to be 2, then the preprocessor will go through your code and it'll find any instance where you use said macro and replace it with that. So something that you can think of SASS as, you can think of SASS as kind of like a fancy way of compiling your CSS down into something that is, readable by your browser, but giving you the flexibility and the abstraction that you get out of having something that's kind of like a compiler. All right, cool. So in the README, right now things are a little out of order, but I'm going to start off by just showing you guys how you can get it installed and how you can use it in your projects. So what I've done right here is I've opened up a example React app. I just created it with Create React App. We're going to go ahead and change directories into it. Oh, example React. There we go. And to get going with SASS, all we're going to need to do is just say npm install node SASS, just like that. Now, you might be asking a few questions right about now, right? Because this is a React app, right? How is React going to know that we have SASS in here all of a sudden? How is it going to deal with all of that? Well, notice that I said I created this with Create React App, right? Well, the people who designed Create React App, in their wisdom, went ahead and provided us with some scripts so that when we are looking at it, we can automatically have our changes reflected. All right, cool. So now that that's all out of the way, how are we going to actually use it? Easy enough. Let's go ahead and find an instance where we're using a CSS file. In this case, I'm looking at the default app.js. And all we got to do is just rename some things. In this case, it's going to be SCSS for SASS. And if we refresh this, and we go ahead and start up our dev server, this is going to try and force me to open Firefox, which is not what I want to do. I just want to open Chromium. Oh, it's 3000. Wrong port. There we go. So you can see here that all I've done is rename the file, so nothing has actually been changed here, right? All we've done is we've just changed the import and we've made it so that this is a SASS file. Okay, so now what are some of the things that we can do with SASS? Well, I'm going to name one that's very cool right off the bat. You probably haven't seen this before, but you can go ahead and create variables. And all you got to do to name one is just by putting a $sign at the front of it. So let's say my var name. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and make this one equal to 4 vmin, just like that. And for using them later on, you just go ahead and type it in as you'd expect. Refresh, nothing has changed. But if we change something, right, let's say I make this 25, then this is going to immediately reflect. So height is going to be changed. And now, as you can see in our reflected, on our web server, the height of the logo has been changed. We can go ahead and revert it, and it's back to normal. Pretty handy. Now, you can do that for values, but you can also use this for more complicated things. So like my color, right? Let's say that I have a favorite color. This is one I think I was using on my website. And we can go ahead and take a look. Let's just find something to set it to, maybe the background color. This is going to be really low contrast, but it gets the point across, right? We can go ahead and use variables wherever we see fit. Pretty handy. Okay, so what are some other things we can do with SASS? Well, I'm glad you asked, person who is Matt. Anyways, what we can do is we can conduct math and we can do operations for values inline very easily. So for example, have you ever had this very frustrating situation where, oh man, I really wanted to get the, the perfect size. And in my case, let's say the perfect size is 40 vmin minus like 30 pixels, right? Well, you can do that in SASS. You just type it in exactly like that. It's pretty amazing. Oh.
Do you mind just zooming in a bit for the
Yeah,
edit?
excuse me. I should have used the proper units here, by the way. It's vmin. It'll work better with percentage units. But anyways, so now you should be able to see this a little better. What we've done here is we've just basically subtracted the units here, right? So we've taken away 30 from 40, gives us 10, proper height, as expected. Now, there are ways of doing this in vanilla CSS, and the way that you do it is with the calc. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that as we would. So in this case, we would do 30 vmin, and I'm going to just get rid of that part right there, and it'll have the same effect, except in SASS, it's a lot easier to type and to look at. Pretty handy. So what are some other things that we can do in SASS that you can't do in traditional CSS? Here's something that CSS won't have up on SASS for a long time, and that's for loops. So if I have in my app, right, let's say I have a, well, in this case, it's actually laid out pretty nicely. So let's go ahead and say I wanted to apply some style to the, you know, children 1 through 3 of a particular container. So let's go ahead and say that this is div ID content, and then I'll just go ahead and paste in some headers here. And I'll just paste 4 of them. Perfect. Well, there are ways that we can do this in traditional CSS, but something that might be a little bit more semantically valuable, a little more idiomatic, is by using a for loop. And the way that we go ahead and do that is by prepending at to the keyword for. Pretty straightforward. So you'll notice this trend as we go through the remainder of SASS. But if we go ahead and do this, we just go ahead and specify a variable name to be used as the iterator. In this case, I say k, and we're going to go ahead and give the values. So in this case, it's going to be 1 through 3. And what is the style that we want to apply here? Well, we want to apply it to a child of div. So I'm going to break out something here. Oh, whoops, it's content. I'm going to break out a pseudo element. We're just going to go ahead and put that right in here. And something that won't work here, or at least it won't work as expected, is if we just put the value right in there. That's because this is within some braces. So we just go ahead and fix that with that. By prepending a hash and squiggly, or what do you call it, curly braces, you're able to reference variables from within different CSS constructs. So what do I want to do? Let's do something kind of complicated. Something I do in the README here is I make it so that the color of each of these elements, each of these children as we go down, gets brighter. So let's say that I declare a variable and I just call this one my color. And I'm going to make it, you know, maybe like the background color that we currently use on the app. And then what I'll do is I'll just hover over this, bump it up a little bit, maybe make it like bluish. There we go. That looks pretty nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to lighten it. This is another thing that is provided by SASS. There's a bunch of handy little macros like lighten, darken, etc. That allow you to change colors and work with colors in a very programmatic, very natural way. So let's go ahead and lighten up our favorite color by a certain amount. Since we're iterating through, I'm going to go ahead and say k times 3, right? So now if we take a look, as expected, the colors get brighter as we go through, except, notice this, we did only children 1 through 3. Nth child 1, 2, 3, but not 4. And this is why 4 is untouched. If we go and change this, then look at that, automatically reflected. Very useful. All right, so that covers probably the big stuff I'd say that you might be interested in SASS. I can cover a few other neat little things, but you're not required to really worry about this. This is all just stuff that might make your development life a little bit easier and make writing styles a little bit easier. So while we're on the topic of hierarchy and kind of making things or styling things based on where they are on the page, in relation to where they are on the page, I accidentally opened up the developer reference there, sorry. Anyways, what we can do is something like this. This is something that you won't see in traditional CSS, and that is hierarchical styling. So what you can do is declare a particular tag, a particular selector, and then within it you can nest different styles that you'd like to apply to specific tags within it. Pretty useful. So if I have a header, actually let's make it a header of size 2. I don't want to screw up our lightning. If I have a header that has, yeah, let's do that, a header of size 2 within content, then it'll automatically get this color. Right, I accidentally opened the docs. There we go. So you can see that it automatically applies it as expected. Pretty handy. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about in this video, because I'm already a little over time, is Mixins. Mixins is probably the most attractive thing that SASS offers, okay? So if I have a collection of very, I would say related styles, right? One good example that I've noticed here in, where is it? I think it's an index. Yeah. So in CSS, you do have a handful of platform dependent or platform specific style properties. So for example, here, we are trying to smooth out the font. We're trying to anti-alias it. And to do so, we have to specify two separate properties here, WebKit font smoothing and Moz OSX font smoothing. And they have two separate values, very frustrating. Well, what we can do is we can group these together in something called a Mixin. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to see an @ followed by the name of the keyword, in this case Mixin. And let's say that it's anti-alias font, so AA font. And what you specify then is the arguments, if there are any. In this case, I'm going to say no. And then you can just put in what you might want to see. And then to use this in our styles, all we're going to do is just @include. And I just realized here, you shouldn't forget this. You should rename this to SCSS. So that way it's recognized as SASS. So now we can include it just by saying @include and then the name of it. Really handy. All right, so if we refresh, nothing has changed. But if we were to put something else in here, let's say that in addition to anti-aliasing the font, it also changes the color to black. Oh, wait, whoops. Oh, it's getting overwritten. If you think back to the CSS cascade, right now, what's going on is the CSS specificity rules are taking, or the specificity rules and the cascade are taking effect. So right now, our styles that are declared way up top in the index are not going to be applied. But my point still stands that we're able to lift code that's common up out of it and put it into a Mixin that we can use and copy, or we can use and just include in any area that we're interested in. So if it wasn't in the body, then we could put it in a slightly more specific location, like in app.css. And that brings me to my last point. If we have a Mixin that's declared in another file, like index, right? Well, how would I want to use that? I'd probably want to use that in another SASS file. That's kind of the whole appeal here, right? If we're using a preprocessor, I want to personally be able to modularize my code. I want to make it a little bit more abstract, just so that way it's easier for me, the developer, to understand. And it takes some of the process out of, takes some of the complexity away from me, so that way I can focus on just trying to get the core out there. So what we can do in order to import modules, mixins, etc., styles from other files is just import them as expected. All you're going to do is just go ahead and type in @import, and then you can specify the name of the file. So in this case, I'm going to say index.scss. And then we would be able to use our Mixin, and any file, and in any styles that are applied in this file would be automatically included as well. Pretty handy. So if I had some specific styles for, say, my blog posts, then what I would want to do is create post.scss. And then if I am on a blog post, all I would need to do to apply the styles from this file would just be to include it or to import. Pretty useful. So that's going to go ahead and cover our quick, super quick flyover of what SASS can do for you. There's a lot more that it offers, and I really encourage you to check out the documentation that they have online. It's very detailed and it's very helpful. There's a lot of cool things that SASS can do that I didn't talk about. But yeah, if you have a minute and you're interested, definitely encourage checking it out. Just a refresher here, the way we included it is we just installed it with .sass. We talked about how it has variables, for loops, function, or mixins. It does have functions. Check them out on the documentation. And how you can modularize your styles by putting things in different files. Pretty handy. So I'm going to go ahead and say that does it. If you have any questions, feel free to come to Matt and my office hours.
Yeah, just one quick thing I'll note is that if you want to update your package.json with your new file, you need to include the -- save argument. So like that. And that's going to update your package.json and your package lock. So if you're working with a team, it's really important for you to do that step. And just to give you a bit of motivation, like when do people use SASS in real life? Well, tons of websites use SASS, as Leo talked about his blog example or personal website. But for example, at Teach LA, we also use SASS. We want to make sure that we follow ACM's design guidelines about what colors we're supposed to use, the fonts we're supposed to use, and all that kind of good stuff. And we can use tools like Mixins and SASS variables and for loops to make our life a lot easier. So that's one example. Another example is that ACM Hack also uses SASS when they code their own websites as well, again, to get a lot of that standardization and make it easier for us to collaborate on a lot of different tools. So hopefully you'll find that this is a useful skill for your learning labs as well, especially if you're working on a team. You can easily, make sure that you all use the same colors. The very last thing I'll point out is just in relation to our CSS frameworks lesson. I mentioned that a few CSS frameworks like Bootstrap or Balma are written in SASS. So now you know a little bit about SASS. You can actually customize those frameworks. You can change the variables that they've set. So maybe you don't like that Bootstrap is rounded everywhere. You can set the global border radius to none. If you don't like the fact that Bootstrap has these weird colors, you can change those to now using SASS variables as well. So now you're kind of empowered with the tools to take these frameworks that already exist and kind of change them up however you wish. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, Leo, for letting me say that.
Yeah, I think that covers it. Yeah. Sweet. All right. Yeah, tune in next time, I guess.